From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
I'm Charlie Meyerson, filling in for Ken Davis, who's off enjoying some wonderful time off, last I heard anyway. He'll be back in June for sure, I promise. Joining us today, some of Chicago's most talented and I'm hoping most conversational and talkative journalists. Ted Cox, DNAinfo.com Chicago City Hall reporter and author of a new book, 1001 Days in the Bleachers, a quarter century of Chicago sports. Scott Stantis, Chicago Tribune editorial cartoonist. And Rob Hart from WLUP-FM 97.9. And before that, my colleague at WGN Radio and the expired and gone to meet its maker, FM News Chicago.
An idea that was ahead of its time, which is the nice way of saying a gigantic screaming train wreck failure.
It was not. It was a lot of fun. But
it was a lot of fun.
That's another show altogether.
It was a lot of fun.
It's a mini-series.
As a human enterprise, it was a lot of fun. As a business venture, not so much.
Fine. Another show, as I said. We're here to talk about so many other things that affect Chicago in an important way. And one of them is so new that, frankly, we're a little behind the curve. There's apparently a new cover story in Time magazine this week. Newsstand didn't even have it. It's on the web. Cover story for Time magazine, big letters in front of a picture of Mayor Rahm Emanuel. Chicago Bull. It's a look at Mayor Rahm Emanuel 2 years into his term by David Von Driel. And it portrays him, well, you guys have had a chance to scan it. What do you think about it? Ted, you brought it to my attention.
It portrays him as this embattled battler out of the paddock, but completely ignoring that there was a recent study done that the council votes more in step with Rahm than it did even under either Daley. So, I mean, I'm not saying that he's not embattled on some fronts, but to say that there's this big Democratic civil war going on seems like a little premature, but it'll probably sell some copies here.
It quotes him as saying, as he said in a number of other interviews, including one with me a year ago, that he has no higher aspirations, doesn't want to be president. This is the best job he's ever had. Do we believe him?
Oh, of course, he's a politician.
We have to believe him.
A cover story for Time magazine. I find that hard to believe that this will be the last office that Rahm Emanuel will run for.
Do you really?
I do. You don't?
I think he might stay in this job and just like a LaGuardia type of guy. And I don't think. I think anybody who's covered him knows that he's not the most comfortable. He's not a natural politician like a Clinton. I think he's a little prickly and.
That's one word.
Yeah, and I think I think he prides himself on being an administrator. It seems, and I don't see until he runs for a higher office. I'm willing to take him at his word.
The comments posted on the Time blog, which refers to this article, are interesting in and of themselves. Again, the cover story headline is Chicago Bull. A number of commenters predictably comment there's a word missing there. The comments that have shown up so far at this airing suggest that the commenters are not big fans of Rahm Emanuel.
Well, internet commenters as a class tend to be fairly negative people, but this strikes me as being incredibly ill-timed. It comes only 7 days after the school board voted to close 50 schools, an incredibly unpopular decision. And on top of that, you have the news of the new and not so improved parking meter deal. Can he even make it past 2015? I think that's my question. I mean, you get reelected before you run for president.
Ted, you've been at City Hall, as part of your beat, and certainly these last few days as the parking meter deal revisions come before a city council. What's going on there?
That's what everybody wants to know, and I think what it comes down to is what kind of competition he faces, whether it's stiff competition or a palooka, and a lot of that depends on clout. And he has proved himself already pretty astute at handling clout, and part of the winning is getting people not to run against you.
Yeah, well, I mean, he does have that power of incumbency, which in Chicago is substantial. The power of the purse string, the power of fundraiser. You know, he's certainly got a vast campaign war chest at this point that would make challenging him daunting for anybody.
But one thing that's interesting too is last week with Tony Preckwinkle, the Cook County Board President, siding with the teachers and saying we shouldn't be closing schools. I mean, that is clearly, to me, a sign that she's going to be running against Rahm Emanuel in the next election, which is weird if you think.
Wait. I don't think that's not a clear signal. But I think
it
is clear that it's clear that she is nettling him on a regular basis and on very touchy subjects. Like, you know, she has picked on him as far as like crime and the violence problem in town.
That doesn't strike you as setting yourself up for a run against this guy?
What I'm saying is she's nettling him, and I think she's, you know, there are some people say that she's just kind of made a mistake, that she, you know, with these occasional, not misquotes, but
well, the thing about Reagan,
right?
instance,
exactly.
Has special place in
she
hell for
goes
him.
off sort of half cocked, but no, I don't think so. She's pretty astute as a politician. I think she is testing him for weakness, and there's a lot of time to go before 2015, and she's got to run for re-election herself.
Is she not possibly encouraging Emanuel to find someone to challenge her, whether she wants to or not?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't see. That's the thing, is that, you know, she is first and foremost, and I think she would tell you herself, a Democrat, and that's one of the things about the story is like there's this huge. I don't yet see a huge civil war in Democrats, but. I'm not saying that's not possible, and that would be a signal if he were to try to do that. But, you know, good luck getting anybody, I think, to run against her in It's only next year.
And what's interesting about this whole thing, to my view, too, is that you described the mayor as prickly, but you have to mention Tony Preckwinkle to have an infusion of charisma in a race. Think about this for just a moment.
You're not high on your charisma scale.
It's a low bar.
And then you also have to talk about the fundraising apparatus that Rahm has and his ability to raise money. And he could spread out a lot of money and get a lot of stalking horses into that race in 2015 just to break up the competition.
But the crime numbers, you still have an exodus, particularly from the south side of the city. But more importantly, the parking meters, which you touched on in a second. Still, I'm looking at this deal, and the company that runs the meters now, if you look at least by the Tribune's analysis, the pay by cell phone plan, that's part of the new improved. Sorry, my cynicism just boils up.
Lemonade deal. It's the lemonade deal.
A $76 million windfall for them. The Tribune
that is
analysis
extended over 71 years. So.
Okay, but there's $517 million more if you have extended hours and free parking in some areas on Sunday. Where do we, as citizens of Chicago, get the good part? Where is the good part?
Well, that's the thing.
For us?
I think push comes to shove this week, as far as the aldermen are still talking about how they might like actually having meters on Sundays to keep the parking spaces in flux, the churn for businesses. And, you know, Rahm has his Corporation Council signaled that they would be receptive to allowing the aldermen to maintain that. The trick is it's going to have to do quickly, because this takes effect July 1st, and unless you want the confusion of a few weeks where there's free parking on Sunday and then all of a sudden that ends, and you've got to get it done right away. So we'll see what happens. I think they're planning to vote on it next week, and where that push comes to shove.
Interesting schism, as I see it, between the Emanuel administration's approach to the parking meter contract, which has been, it's a contract that there's very little we can do about it, we can't do anything, and then the Emanuel administration's approach to OSE teachers' contracts, the school board, where they have regularly been reworked or revoked, or hardships have been pleaded.
Sorry, we can't pay you that raise that
you
negotiated.
Plus the fact that apparently, according to this mayor, this contract was negotiated by a man who cannot be named.
It's been tacit all the way through. Yeah, he's beaten him up pretty good without naming him once.
Yes, it's remarkable. The name never comes up of Daley, and he's being feted as the best mayor that we ever had, and this is one of the worst contracts I think a city may have ever signed.
It has been fascinating, the verbal acrobatics Mayor Emanuel performs to avoid mentioning Mayor Daley in almost any context, but certainly in negative
But at the
context.
same time, you know, laying it at his feet at these various problems that he's talked about, things that he inherited.
It's incredible how non-Chicago this parking meter deal has been through and through, because one of the reasons why the Daley machine became a machine in the 1950s and 60s is because Richard J. Daley believed that good politics is good government, and that whenever you encountered the city of Chicago, whether you had to call the alderman to fix a pothole on your street or fix the curb or make sure that the tree that fell down was removed, that it was prompt, and that you always knew who was responsible for helping you out. And now we're in a situation where your contact with the city of Chicago on an almost daily basis is feeding a parking meter where you didn't feed it before. So instead of saying, this is the city and it's doing stuff for me, you say, this is the city and it's ripping me off.
Yeah. Speaking of which, one of the things the Emanuel administration has been very boastful about, very proud of, and is now getting ready to roll out is this bike sharing program, the Divvy bicycle. I'm still not clear why it's called Divvy. Anybody know?
Divvy up.
Divvy up. Yeah.
I guess they're sharing.
It's my old man's word.
I'm thinking divisions. Well, I mean, I know that's what
Well,
it
it's a
means,
Canadian company, so they're quaint up there.
Yeah. $75 a year for the right to pick up a bike at one of several bike stations, mostly concentrated to begin with downtown at CTA stations, among other places, and ride it to any other place. Drop it off, you're done with it, you wash your hands. $75, you can do that anytime you want, so long as the ride is just 30 minutes. After that, late fees begin to kick in. I think it's a couple of bucks for even 1 minute overdue. What do we think about this? Can this work in Chicago?
I don't see how. I mean, I came back from Paris recently, and they do have that there, and it is successful, but that's a community that's used to riding bicycles and used to sharing this type of thing. Let me run down some of the details, which are fascinating. 17-page rental agreement and liability waiver you have to sign before you actually can get the thing. The late fees start at 30 minutes. 31 to 60 minutes is $1.50. 61 to 90 is $4.50. It can go up to $1,200 if it's 24 hours late or more to replace the bike. Now, are these bikes made out of what? You know, gold, cubic zirconium? I don't know.
They have lights that come on whenever you ride them. You don't have to turn them on or off.
The other part is there's a $7 daily pass, which sounds like a great idea, but if you live in the Loop, as I do, the only thing that would make your brain itch more than more tourists down there during the summer is more tourists on bicycles. What could possibly go wrong? You have Chicago Transportation Commissioner Gabe Klein predicting that the program will be so successful it will pay for itself.
Famous last words.
Oh, when have we heard this?
In fairness, I understand these programs have done well so far in Washington and in a number of Canadian cities. Seattle.
I did see them in place 3 years ago in Montreal when I went on vacation there. But you're talking about cities that are culturally wedded to the subway. Paris has one of the most extensive subway systems in the world. Montreal has one of the most extensive subway systems in the Western Hemisphere. And Washington, nobody owns a car. Everybody either walks or rides the metro. So it would stand to reason that a bike sharing program would work there. Chicago, even though it is a transit city where people do take the train, there's still a bit of a car culture here. And asking someone to spend $75 a year to rent a bike for half an hour a day, then wouldn't it just be more advantageous to go to the bike shop and buy a used bike?
Maybe, but then you've got the problem of taking care of it, and on days when you need to ride it downtown, and then you're going getting a ride somewhere else, you've got your bike to worry about. I can say, and there's of course a generational shift going on too. I think go to Bucktown, go to the near North Side, go to Logan Square. Bikes are everywhere, and there's a relatively young population there, and these are people who might value. I think this is the Emanuel administration's thinking, that they at least would value the idea of a bike on demand.
Oh, absolutely.
Is this for kids then? Are any of us going to do the divvy? Are you going to do the
I've
divvy,
been
Charlie?
I've been tempted.
Really?
Get off the L and ride a few blocks to someplace that's not near the L. I don't know if it's worth $75 a year.
And I have to admit, I just bought the same Schwinn Continental hipster antique bicycle I had as a teenager for $150 used, and so I have no interest in this.
But do you ride it? Do you use it?
Yes, I do.
Are there times when you find yourself someplace and say, I wish I had my bike, I could hop on it right now?
The other thing about it is that you can always take it on the L if you want. I mean, if you really get to that point. But
outside
actually,
of rush hour. Outside of rush
me,
hour.
The CTA works pretty well, I think, as far as getting from here to there.
Well, we'll see. Governor Quinn, speaking of transportation, Governor Quinn has a chance to sign a bill that he says, as he always does, he's going to take his time reviewing, that would uniformly, across Illinois, ban the use of cell phones statewide. We now have a patchwork of, some municipalities ban the use of handheld communication while you're driving and others don't. This would be a statewide law saying, you got to use hands-free device if you're going to use a cell phone. What do you think? Should the state be bigfooting local municipalities in this matter?
Is it Bigfooting or is it the nanny state that we're talking about?
A Bigfoot nanny state. What do you think of a bigfooted? Is a bigfooted nanny a big thing? Or a nanny-footed big? I don't know. Well, what do you think? Either way.
I think having uniformity in a state makes sense. Other states in the union have this. This isn't something you have to think that hard about. Anyone who drives on the freeway, almost invariably you get killed by some guy or woman, and they're doing this and driving. Or worse, if they try to be clever and they're doing this.
Yeah, it's
Either that or their crotch is on fire. One or the other, they should outlaw it. And so it makes just common sense to have this law as a statewide law.
What about other things that involve hands?
The same thing that we're at the same. Is this at the same time we're raising the speed limit to 70?
Yes, potentially anyway.
well, as long as
So in other words, because we know that you're not going to be on the phone, then we can raise it to 70.
if your eyes are on the road and both hands are on the wheel, then 70 miles an hour should be okay. Is this a case, though, where technology is ahead of the law? That when these cell phone bans first came into effect 6 or 7 years ago, I believe New York State actually outlawed cell phone usage while driving 10 years ago, that maybe with the advent of hands-free and Bluetooth in every car, that you really don't have to literally pick up the phone to make a phone call anymore while you're in your car. You can just press a couple of buttons or even use voice recognition technology to say, well, call my wife, call my son, and you can talk through the car.
You haven't used Siri, have you? Because that's like, call my wife.
And of course, ultimately, the real solution is once you get one of these self-driving cars that Google is experimenting with, then you can do whatever you want with your hands. Which is kind of a frightening concept, isn't it?
Actually, I kind of like it.
Text to your heart's content.
That's right. Prediction time. Next year's Illinois elections. Who runs for governor? Who wins?
Had a fascinating conversation. Lisa Madigan, of course, is by far and away the top candidate. Every poll shows her ahead of Democratic and Republican opposition, except I was talking with a pretty high-ranking Democratic political last night, except when you factor in if her dad stays in the speakership. And those poll numbers apparently just go voot. I mean, she's even with people like Rutherford or Dillard or all those guys. That is the billion-dollar question.
In other words, people are inclined not to have her be governor if her father is still running the Illinois House.
Of course.
Has anybody heard of him not wanting to be speaker anymore?
No, I can't imagine that happening unless he really wants his daughter to be governor. I think even in Illinois, where we can elect Blago, we can elect Orion. Having a daughter, father in the two highest positions in the state, that would be troublesome to a lot of people. And I think that those polls are probably accurate. And this is among Democratic likely voters, by the way.
Has anybody, this is pure speculation, it's a rumor that I'm starting right here. Has anybody heard speculation that this might be a year in which Madigan, senior, Michael Madigan, decides to leave the House? I mean, solving the pension crisis wouldn't be if his plan, which seems to be widely praised, passes the General Assembly, final act on which to tip his hat and exit and let his daughter take center stage.
It's been 25 years.
Sounds like a great script.
It does.
Go with it.
Movie, yeah. No one's heard that. Okay, well, you've heard it here, and it's probably not true. So. Blackhawks, discuss.
Oh, what a game last night. Oh, my gosh. I was at Club Lago last night, which...
Club Lago,
yes.
Not Club Blago.
Right,
Just
Lago,
to
just to be very specific.
Okay, good.
And the place was packed, and the owners, and that call in the third period, did you guys watch the game? It was crazy, and people were going nuts. And then winning it in overtime was phenomenal. And now they're going on and taking on the Los Angeles Kings. That's going to be a great series as well, but my gosh.
Talk about a great script, 7-game series with the Wings, who are waving goodbye to the Eastern Conference. What a way to go out. And then the Stanley Cup champions come in.
And you talk about how do you erase the taste of a work stoppage from the fans' mouths. I mean, contrast that to the baseball strike of 1994, and that there are some White Sox fans who are still angry over the fact that the season stopped when the team was in first place and they were very likely to make the World Series. And then they
I'd like to correct that. There are no White Sox fans who don't feel that way if they're true White Sox fans.
You're right about that, too. But there are people who are still upset about that because they face-planted so hard coming out of the gates in 1995. If the Blackhawks were mediocre this year, people would still be upset about the lockout, and they would still be angry about the lockout, and that anger could last for years. Now the lockout is absolutely ancient history, and the Blackhawks did a fine job of making it right just by playing well.
Does this season get an asterisk?
Also, wait.
Okay.
It also shows the power of really good ownership. I mean, Rocky Wirtz turned that franchise around. It was bereft. Bill Wirtz had driven it into the ground, and just with a few key, we're going to put our games on TV. We're going to bring back Pat Foley, and all of a sudden it's a hockey town again.
John McDonough, super genius.
That's true,
he
too.
is the best sports marketing guy in this city, above and beyond Bill Veeck.
Jump from
I
the
think, in my
Cubs to the
mind.
Blackhawks, just for those people who haven't been following his career.
He turned the Cubs into the Cubs in the 80s, and he's been minding the store during the Blackhawks renaissance.
Does this season, does whoever wins the Stanley Cup take an asterisk with that cup because it is a shortened season? Does it count as much as other Stanley
I don't
Cups?
know if the Braves organization or Braves fans see their World Series championship when they played in the abbreviated season. So I doubt it. Over time, people
I know. Yeah, I agree.
will look at this and smile.
Sports Business Journal says White Sox and Bulls owner Jerry Reinsdorf plans to have his family sell the White Sox after he dies, but keep the Bulls. What do we think?
It is hard to believe that Jerry Reinsdorf is 77 years old, and he has been a part of the Chicago sports landscape for 32 years now. He bought the White Sox in March of 1981 from Bill Veeck. It was the second choice for Bill Veeck. He wanted to sell the team to Ed DiBartolo, the shopping mall magnate, but the lords of the American League at the time said that he had to sell his racetrack interests, and he also had to move his ownership group from Ohio to Chicago. The conspiracy theorists say that they did that as one last parting shot to Veeck because he was such a rebel in the ranks of baseball ownership. Reinsdorf is a guy who was always, he's never been flashy. He's not a Donald Trump. He doesn't roll around town in the big car peeling off the wads of cash. He's a guy who gets the deals done. And it'll be interesting to see how Michael Reinsdorf handles the sale of the White Sox if he chooses to do so. He might want to keep the team, but hopefully, for the Reinsdorf's case, that this is a long way away. That Mr. Reinsdorf is with us for quite some time. His era is going to be a fascinating one to look back on. You talk about the deal that got New Comiskey Park, U.S. Cellular Field built. You talk about
it's a gun to the head deal.
Yeah, that it's
at the taxpayer expense.
Mm-hmm. He's got very high ups and very high lows as far as his whole tenure.
This lawsuit that's been going through federal court, filed by the former executive director of the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority, kind of opens the books on the lease the White Sox have with the state to stay in U.S. Cellular Field. And if you talk about a sweetheart deal that was negotiated between Reinsdorf and Jim Thompson, from a businessman standpoint, Reinsdorf is just an absolute genius. The way he was able to get the taxpayers to build this ballpark and then only pay $1.5 million in rent per year. It wasn't tied to ticket sales. It's a flat fee of $1.5 million.
And from the taxpayer's point of view, it's a complete and total ripoff.
Yeah, we get
sector,
nothing in return.
Less than nothing. In some analysis.
One of those socialize the risk and privatize the profit deals.
We're entering the lightning round. Short questions now. Cubs this week held sort of a dress rehearsal for new signs in the outfield. They put up some framework so people could see what happened. Seems like kind of a nice gesture. Not something apparently they were required to do, and they're opening the table for discussion. Is it a good thing that they did this?
Oh, I think they had to do it, and I believe the initial response from the rooftops was it was not a condemnation. So there seems to be some negotiation that can be done there.
As a fairly new person here in Chicago, I just have to say, and this is not new, the rooftop people, it's like you have cable and your neighbor across the alley can look in your window and watch your cable, and you close the drapes, and they get mad that you close the drapes. I'm sorry. I understand they have a deal now with the Cubs, but it seems a very strange construct.
Fenway Park did this 10 years ago. They were going to tear down Fenway Park. They were going to build a new one across the street, and then ownership came in, and because they couldn't add capacity to Fenway, they could not make the ballpark footprint bigger. They just bought the other blocks and made that Fenway. When you go inside Fenway, it's when you go onto Lansdowne Street, not when you go actually inside the physical Fenway Park. And this is what the Ricketts are trying to do. They want to make sure that Wrigley Field starts on Waveland or Clark or Addison, and not when you actually enter the gate into the ballpark, and keep all of the money inside there. So everyone's going to get paid. I mean, this is Chicago. Everybody's going to get paid. This is negotiating posturing right now, but in the end, everybody's going to get paid, and everyone's going to be happy.
Does that include the taxpayers? Does that include the people of Chicago getting paid something? Increased revenue, ticket tax, entertainment?
Pass.
The mayor has said that there will be no public subsidy on this, and he's held to that pretty firmly.
Yeah, but
and then, it's also exactly. It's and it's also it's fairly complicated in that Wrigley. The reason Wrigley has this intimate relationship with the neighborhood is because the neighborhood is right there, and it's part of the ballpark. It's part of the vista that you see and that you pay for when you go and sit at the grandstand. I lived in one of those buildings back in the day when they had roaches in them, and you could go up on the rooftop.
Me too. The roaches in my apartment did very well when the place went condo. I had long since left. Yeah.
But now they've all been bought up by all these firms, and they are a corporation unto themselves right outside. So there is this bucolic old sense of what it used to be, but at the same time, people trafficking in it to make money now. But I think, like you said, and like the mayor has said, there's a deal there if everybody just has a sense to accept it.
Rolling Stones, speaking of entertainment, at the United Center next few days. Mr. Hart, you have tickets. What are you looking for?
Yeah, as part of my metamorphosis from a journalist into a rock and roll guy at the Loop, it's interesting the degree to which the Rolling Stones are still a big deal. I mean, we always joked about how they would be on stage in their 70s, 50 years down the road from when they first got together. It is now 50 years since they first got together. They are in their 70s, and they're the talk of the town. I mean, people are wondering where they're going to show up. Are they going to do those shows in the small clubs like the time they went to the Double Door, the time they went to Buddy Guy's? Yeah. You'd think it was 1981, the way people are talking about the Rolling Stones here.
I don't know what to say about this. I mean, Keith Richards is dead, just no one's bothered to tell him. It just seems to me it's a reflection of our generation, 50 and over, kind of sucking all the oxygen out of the room and not leaving anything for younger artists to do. And it's a constant frustration, and I think our generation kind of sucks.
I heard some commercial for something. I don't even know if it was music or what. But someone was quoting someone as saying the best music. I think it was a small market radio station I was driving through. Some say they said the best music ever written has already been recorded. This was obviously an oldie station. True or false?
False.
Absolutely false.
It's an easy one.
It was like when they tried to close down the patent office, saying everything important had been invented. I believe this was, 1880?
Mm-hmm. And we had that rush of philosophical statements a few years ago, the end of history, and then, of course,
wrong answer.
That was before 2001, among other things. I think we're almost done here. Anything else you want to put on the table, gentlemen? Anything you want to talk about that we haven't discussed? Something burning within you that you want to say?
You're the host.
I know. Well, I like to. It's a democratic.
You're the healer, Bones Hill.
We're out of gas here. So my guests, who have not been very helpful in this last phase of the show, I'm sorry to say, have been Rob Hart of WLUP-FM, Ted Cox of DNAinfo.com/Chicago, Scott Stantis, Chicago Tribune editorial cartoonist. Thank you all for coming. And next time, bring more questions. Coming up, as soon as. There we go. You've been watching, there we go, let's do this again. Take two. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom, a community service of CAN TV, and of course you can find us on cable, and you can also see us online at this address right here, which you can see but I can't. Check us out or subscribe on iTunes. Next week on Chicago Newsroom, Natalie Moore of WBEZ, who I will encourage to bring just a few more questions with her. She'll be filling in for Ken Davis, and he'll be back the week after that, assuming that he still wants to, and I think he does. I'm Charlie Meyerson. Thanks for joining us.